Welcome to week 2 of game design and analysis. This week, we're going to be talking about the elemental tetrad, about game mechanics, and about unified design. So this video should be relatively short. Okay, so how do we analyze and design games, right? This is game design and analysis. Turns out that's a really big topic. And so we're going to break it down into parts. So it's something we can actually approach and study. So once we have those parts, we're then going to be able to talk about how we can use them in design. And then most importantly, we can start to talk about how we make those parts work together. Because being able to identify all the parts, having all the techniques that you need for game design is like having a barn stuffed full of useful things, and you can't find anything, right? And so it's hard to get anything done. So how to make everything work together is very important. The process of breaking down design is something called decomposition. So that doesn't have to do with rotting in this case, but you'll hear in computer science about functional decomposition or object-oriented decomposition. And those are breaking things down by what they do or breaking things down by what they are. So those two categories will come back in just a minute. So second thing that we're talking about here is the elemental tetrad. This is a concept brought forward by Jesse Schell, who wrote Art of Game Design, which is a book you'll be reading a bunch of in this class and hopefully referring to throughout your career. It is certainly my favorite book on game design and the favorite book of literally every other game designer that I know. It's amazing. But he says that that game design has 4 parts, right? There's 4 aspects to design. There's the mechanics of a game, which are what we're going to talk about today, which he defines as, you know, the rules of the game, the space, object, actions, skill and chance, things like that. The mechanics of the game, the things that make it go. The aesthetics of the game, which he talks about as how the game looks, how it sounds, you know, taste, smells. I don't know about that. Those don't seem to be great ideas in terms of games, but, you know, and very importantly, how the game feels to you. You're going to run into the term aesthetics again next week, talking about MDA, which is a framework that you'll learn more about. Aesthetics here really does mean the look and feel of your game. Later, when we talk about aesthetics in MDA, we're going to be talking about it in terms of how it makes your game feel or how it makes to a player or to yourself. And those are slightly different concepts. But here we really are talking about the physical presentation of the game. The story of your game, right? What's the narrative aspect of it? What's the through line idea? Even Tetris has a story. You know, it's not a hugely compelling epic, but it is a story about how you're stacking up these bricks and you're trying to, you know, keep them to a minimum and you're trying to get the highest score. There's a minimal narrative through line. So there's always narrative to a degree and story to a degree in a game. Sometimes it's the primary aspect and sometimes it's pretty trivial. And then there's the technology. How are you building the game, right? Is it console game? Is it a PC game? You know, is it a mobile game? Is it a board game? Is it a tabletop role-playing game? Is it a field game, which would be something like baseball or tag? You know, so all of those things are relating to the technology you're using to put into the game. And some of those are more visible than others, right? So aesthetics of your game are very visible to everybody playing it. The mechanics and story, they sort of hide behind the aesthetics and support them. And very often the technology is largely invisible. Every year at GDC, there's a technology award, which you know, gives recognition to games that have great technology. And often they're not games that you really think of as being technologically advanced, but there's often a lot going on under the hood. Whether or not that's useful and productive to the whole game is a different story. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So that is mechanics, aesthetics, story, and technology, the elemental tetrad. So game mechanics, that's one of those four parts, and it's the one we're going to focus on today. When we say mechanics, we're usually talking about the rules and actions of the game, right? The physics, the combat, rolling dice, or scoring points in the game. We'll call those game design elements functional game design elements, since they're about how things in the game function, right? In order to talk about mechanics, though, we also have to talk a little bit about the things that are acted on in the game, the objects. And those are formal game design elements, which we would say are about things that have form or substance in the game. We'll break down those two different aspects and why they're important now. So formal game design elements, things that have form in the game. That idea comes from art and architecture that are very interested in what are the pieces that you use to make up a building or to make up a painting or sculpture, right? For art, it's line, shape, form, color, texture, space, and value. This very small set of components that all of art can be created from in art theory. And then principles of design are how you use those things, which would be the functional elements that we're going to talk about in a minute. But in relating to games, I think we need to be a little bit more broad than just looking at those traditional ones from art. In game, formal game design elements are the objects in the game, right? Things like platforms, guns, keys, doors, enemies, skybox textures, all of the objects in the game. The space in the game, where all those things are in relationship to each other, is part of the formal elements of the game, right? Even though the position of the enemy to the player isn't something you can say is an object by itself, it's still something that is a formal part of how you would describe the game. Attributes in the game are things like member variables in object-oriented programming. So if you're a player, you have health and stamina and a maximum speed and a character model height, all of those things. The health potion, how much does it heal you for, is an attribute of the health potion. Still a formal element of the game, even though it's just like a bit of data that is part of an object. And then again, states, the values of individual objects, right? So like if you have health and that changes, your attribute of health changes, what state that's in at any given time. Do I have 5 hearts or 3 hearts? That's a state. My maximum number of hearts would also be a state if that's something that changes over the course of the game. And then also the state of the overall game world. So again, objects in space in the game world change over time. The state of the game world would be the formal element that defines that world at any given moment and all of its parts. And then again, time is how state changes over time in a game. That's also a formal element. So all of those different aspects are the formal elements of game design, and they really cover, everything that isn't a verb in the game. All of the different bits and how they're laid out at any given moment. So there's many that aren't being mentioned here. If you think of something, does it exist in the game world? Yes, then it's a formal element. Then moving on to functional game design elements, right? So that's the verbs, things like run, talk, drive, hide, okay, also shoot, most often shoot. In assignments in this program, you're often going to be asked, make a game, but don't involve shooting. Many games that you create in your career will involve shooting things, and that's fine. There's certainly room for that, but it's not the only verb that you can have. It shouldn't necessarily be the preeminent verb, depending on your intention for your game. And other ways to look at the functional game design elements, rules are the functional game design elements, right? Move 6 spaces each turn, roll a d20 to attack in a role-playing game. That is a functional element. It's about how the game works, what you can do, what the game does, right? If you look at a game, any part of the game that is an action that any part of the game is taking, The movement of a platform is a functional game design element, right? The platform is a formal game design element. And things like goals. What's the goal and purpose of the game? You may hear in a previous or the next course that you have to have goals for it to be a game. People differ in that, but things like be the first player to cross the finish line. That's a functional element of the game. A goal. Kill Ganon if you're playing Zelda. Goal. And again, skills, right? So we might be talking about character skills. Your character can jump. Your character can cast fireball. But we also might be talking about player skills, which is to say the skill level that the player needs to succeed at the goals that you're setting for them. So those are functional game design elements. And the idea of breaking game design down, or game design elements down into functional and formal, that's not universally accepted. It's useful. Try not to be dogmatic about your understanding of game design. Listen to other designers and what they're trying to tell you. Don't argue with them and try to convince them that your taxonomy, your jargon is the right one. Try to communicate. That's what's important. So these are useful ways to break down game design. And we're using them in this course. You'll use them in some other courses here, but different courses are going to have different ways of looking at game design, and they're all useful. Okay, moving on. Unified design. Cool. So we have formal elements, all these different things that we could possibly put in a game. And we have functional elements, all these different verbs, all these different ways that you could possibly interact with the game world. Cool, let's put them all in the game. Terrible idea, don't do that. What mechanics should you use? What formal and functional elements should you introduce into your game to create gameplay? You have to figure out what you want your game to do and only include elements that support that. So what do I mean by that? If you look at a game like Breath of the Wild, right? There's cooking in that game. There's, making potions. There's running around the game world and killing moblins. There's solving puzzles. There's climbing cliffs with a complicated stamina meter. There's, flying and riding on your shield and talking to NPCs and completing quests, all these different activities. But all of those activities work together to create the core fiction of the game, that you're Link, that you are, the hero who has the capacity to save the world and has the skills needed to do that. Everything you do in the game, I make food in the game because I need the buffs that it gives me to travel to certain areas. To get to those areas, I have to climb using, my stamina meter. I need to face enemies and fight them in order to get to the various different dungeons where I'm going to solve puzzles to get more abilities that are going to in turn let me defeat different enemies that exist in different areas of the game that I'm going to need to brew different potions to help myself survive in. I'm going to be damaged and I'm going to need to make food. I'm going to have to craft new items that I need in the game because my weapons keep breaking, and find new ones. So all of the different aspects are working together. All the systems interact in this very clean way where there's nothing in the game that you're like, this doesn't connect with anything else and it's just there because a developer put it there. Looking at a couple of other games that have some similar aspects in gameplay, open world kind of games, right? So say looking at Skyrim, what's the core fantasy that's being created in that game? Is it to save the lands of Tamriel? Is it to be the best assassin and complete that quest line? Or is it the best thief or the best wizard? Or is it to steal all of those things that they've left all over the world to tempt you? Or is it to build a house and decorate it? Or is it to 100% the game, to do everything in it? A lot of open world games suffer from that kind of problem, that the stated core fantasy is you can do anything and play the game any way you want. The problem with doing that is that, well, all of the work and all of the parts of the game world that don't tie into the way that I want to play the game often get in my way in terms of playing the game that way. If I'm playing Skyrim and my goal is to play house, and collect all of the coolest items to decorate my castle, then all of those monsters and dragons and plot are getting in the way of me playing house and doing the thing that I want to do. Um, if my goal is to complete the quest, then the main quest line, then all of the side quests and dungeons and things that keep getting in my way and cluttering up my map are limiting my ability to enjoy my primary driver in the game. So games that do lots and lots of things can have a not very unified design. You get a similar thing that happens in Red Dead Redemption in terms of you can do so many things, but I wanted to cite that one because the control scheme in it, right? Is very odd and quirky. The way you interact with the game world is awkward, and that may or may not be intentional. What it does is cause moments of unexpected emergent gameplay, right? I run up to somebody to talk to them and I'm accidentally standing slightly too far away. And instead of the button I press doing talk, which it would if I was standing closer, it does stab, and I stab them and they fall over and die. And suddenly I'm in the middle of a breakneck chase out of town, being being pursued by the law. So that creates exciting gameplay. But if I'm trying to enjoy the story and play this serious game, and I keep having these wacky things happen that are exciting and fun, that could get in the way of me enjoying the story of the game, which is what I'm trying to interact with, right? If I'm that type of player. If I'm the type of player who really just wants Goat Simulator action, where like all kinds of crazy things happen, then all of the overhead of the game world, and the story can be getting in my way. Lastly, looking at Genshin Impact, which is in a lot of ways a clone of Zelda, of Breath of the Wild, you can see that it has all of those same systems that work together in Zelda, and then they added on a whole bunch of other systems. Gotcha mechanics, all different elemental issues that you have to deal with. And all of those are fun, for a certain type of player, but they aren't integrated in the tight and concise way that the systems in Breath of the Wild are. And so you have a game that doesn't feel as tight and compelling, where the systems of the game in Zelda sort of disappear. And when you imagine the game, you just are imagining the experience of being Link. And when you imagine Genshin Impact, you imagine all of these things that you're trying to keep track of in terms of the other systems that were added. So there you have it. Unified design is making all of the formal and functional elements that you introduce to the game work together. Next week, you'll hear about the MDA framework, which I mentioned a little bit before. And I think Faye is going to talk to you. No, I think Bob was going to talk to you about that. And that is a framework that will help you to create unified design, will help you to keep how those things interact together and give you a system for organizing it. So that's it for this week, and hope you are enjoying your course.